The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones outside Buckingham Palace as Guardsman Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for the final time. At 26 years old, he had served in the Queen's Guard for 3 years, and the routine had become second nature to him. The heavy bearskin hat sat perfectly on his head. His polished black boots reflected the early light like mirrors. Thomas had always taken pride in his duty. Standing motionless for hours, maintaining perfect posture while thousands of tourists photographed him, was both an honor and a challenge. The strict protocols were clear. No talking, no smiling, no reaction to anything happening around him. He was a living statue, a symbol of British tradition and discipline. As he took his position at the palace gates, familiar sounds of London began to fill the air. Tour buses rumbled past, their guides speaking in multiple languages through crackling microphones. Camera shutters clicked constantly as visitors captured their holiday memories. Children laughed and pointed at the famous red-coated guards, some trying desperately to make them smile or move. Thomas had seen it all before. People would make funny faces, tell jokes, even try to tickle him. He remained unmoved, staring straight ahead with unwavering focus. His training had prepared him for every distraction imaginable. Or so he thought. The crowd was particularly thick that Tuesday morning. School groups mixed with families on vacation, creating a colorful tapestry of excitement around the palace entrance. Thomas watched from the corner of his eye as parents lifted small children onto their shoulders for better views and photos. The energy was infectious, but he maintained his composure. Among the crowd, a small figure caught his peripheral vision. A boy, no more than 5 years old, with curly brown hair and wearing a bright blue jacket, was standing very still near the palace railings. Unlike the other children who were running around excitedly, this little boy seemed frozen in place. His small hands gripped the iron bars. His face was pressed against them as he looked around frantically. Thomas noticed the boy's eyes were wide with fear, not wonder. While other children were laughing and playing, this child appeared lost and scared. The guard's training told him to ignore it, to focus straight ahead, and let others handle any situations that might arise. But something about the boy's stillness in the midst of all the chaos made Thomas's heart skip a beat. The boy's lips were moving, and even from his position several feet away, Thomas could see tears beginning to form in the child's eyes. The little one was clearly calling for someone, but his voice was too small to be heard over the noise of the crowd. Tourism continued around him as if he were invisible. People walking past without noticing his distress. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Every instinct as a human being told him to help, but every rule of his position told him to remain still. He had never faced such a conflict between duty and compassion. The protocols were absolute, drilled into every guard from their first day of training. Breaking them could mean serious consequences for his career and reputation. As minutes passed, the boy's situation seemed to worsen. His quiet calling became more desperate, and tears now flowed freely down his cheeks. He began to wander slightly from his spot at the railings, looking in all directions with increasing panic. Thomas realized that this child was truly lost, separated from his family in one of the busiest tourist areas in London. The guard's mind raced. He thought of his own younger brother back home, remembering how scared the boy would get when separated from their parents even for a few minutes in a grocery store. The thought of this small child, alone and frightened in such a crowded place, was becoming unbearable. Thomas tried to catch the eye of nearby police officers or palace staff who might be able to help, but everyone seemed busy with their own duties. The tourist information volunteers were engaged with other visitors, and the police were managing traffic flow. No one else seemed to notice the little boy's growing distress. The child had now moved away from the railings entirely and was standing in the middle of the pedestrian area, turning in slow circles as he searched for familiar faces. His crying was becoming more audible, but the noise of the crowd still drowned out his small voice. Thomas watched as people walked around the boy, some glancing down briefly but assuming he was just a typical cranky child who'd be fine in a moment. The boy's sobs were now clearly visible, his small shoulders shaking as he stood alone in the sea of strangers. Thomas felt sweat forming under his heavy uniform, not from the morning sun but from the internal battle raging in his mind. He had been taught about discipline and protocol, was being challenged by a basic human need to protect a child in distress. Thomas tried to convince himself that someone else would step in. Surely a kind tourist would notice and help the boy find his parents. Perhaps a police officer would spot the situation and take charge. But as the minutes ticked by, the child's distress only grew worse. No help seemed to be coming. The little boy had stopped turning in circles and was now standing completely still again. But this time it was the stillness of defeat rather than searching. His arms hung limply at his sides, and his face was red and streaked with tears. He looked so small and vulnerable among all the adults rushing around him with their cameras and guidebooks. Thomas remembered his own childhood and the panic he had felt when briefly separated from his mother at a crowded market. He could still recall the overwhelming fear, the feeling that the whole world had become hostile and unfamiliar. Looking at this little boy, he could see that same terror written across the child's face. A group of teenagers walked past the boy, laughing loudly about something on one of their phones. They were completely oblivious to his presence. Then a family with their own children rushed by, focused entirely on getting to their next tourist destination. It seemed impossible that so many people could pass by a crying child without stopping to help. Thomas began to notice other details about the boy that made his heart ache even more. The child's blue jacket was slightly too big for him, suggesting he had been dressed warmly by caring parents who were probably frantic about his disappearance. Small sneakers had cartoon characters on them, the kind that light up when children walk. One shoelace was untied, and Thomas found himself wanting desperately to kneel down and fix it for him. The guard's training echoed in his mind, like a constant drumbeat. Stand straight, eyes forward, no interaction with the public. Maintain dignity and discipline at all times. Represent the crown with honor. These principles had guided every moment of his service, and he had never once considered breaking them. But as he watched the boy's tears continue to fall, Thomas realized that sometimes there are situations that transcend rules and protocols. Sometimes being human is more important than being a perfect soldier. The child needed help, and Thomas was perhaps the only person in a position to provide it who had actually noticed his distress. The guard began to consider his options. He could try to get the attention of a nearby officer by making subtle movements. Though this would still technically be breaking protocol, he could wait and hope that someone else would eventually notice the situation. Or he could take direct action and face whatever consequences might follow. Thomas thought about what his commanding officers would say. He imagined the disappointment. In their eyes, the possible disciplinary action, the mark on his service record. But then he looked at the boy again and realized that he could live with professional consequences. Much easier than he could live with the regret of doing nothing to help a frightened child. The boy had begun to wander again. Moving slowly through the crowd with no clear direction, his crying had quieted two soft whimpers, but Thomas could see that his distress was far from over. If anything, the child seemed to be giving up hope, which made the situation even more heartbreaking. Thomas made a decision that would change both his career and his understanding of what it truly means to serve others. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his bearskin hat and the significance of his uniform.
And then,
For the first time in 3 years of guard duty, he prepared to break protocol. The guard began by making small, almost imperceptible movements. He shifted his weight slightly and adjusted his grip on his rifle. To most observers, these would look like normal micro-adjustments that guards sometimes make. But Thomas was actually positioning himself to step forward when the right moment came. He waited for a brief lull in the crowd, a moment when fewer people would witness his actions. The boy had moved closer to his position, now standing only about 10 feet away. Thomas could see every detail of the child's distressed face, and his resolve only grew stronger. Thomas took one final look around to ensure no superior officers were in immediate view. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure people could hear it, but he knew he couldn't wait any longer. The little boy was now crying so hard that he was struggling to catch his breath, and Thomas realized the child might soon collapse from exhaustion and fear, with movements that felt both terrifying and liberating. Thomas stepped forward from his post. The action felt surreal after years of remaining perfectly still. His heavy boots made soft thuds on the pavement as he approached the crying child. Several tourists noticed immediately, pointing and whispering in excitement at seeing a guard. Break character. The boy was so lost in his distress that he didn't notice the red-coated figure approaching until Thomas was directly in front of him. When the child looked up and saw the tall guard with his impressive uniform and kind eyes, his crying momentarily stopped from sheer surprise. He had probably never been so close to one of the famous palace guards before. Thomas knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. The movement was awkward in his formal uniform, but he managed it with dignity. His voice, unused for hours of silent duty, was gentle and warm when he finally spoke. "Lo there, little one, are you lost?" he asked, in the softest tone he could manage while still being heard over the crowd noise. The boy nodded vigorously, fresh tears streaming down his face. He tried to speak but could only manage broken words between sobs. I can single quotes, ... Mummy, he managed to get out, his small voice breaking with each word. The simple, heartbreaking statement confirmed what Thomas had suspected and strengthened his resolve that he had made the right choice. "It's all right now," Thomas said reassuringly. "What's your name, brave boy?" He kept his voice calm and steady, the same tone he had learned to use when comforting frightened soldiers. During his military training, the child responded to the kindness immediately, his rigid posture relaxing slightly. "Danny," the boy whispered, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Danny Johnson. My mummy said to stay close, but there were so many people, and I got scared. And then she was gone." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back during his lonely vigil. Thomas smiled warmly, and for the first time in 3 years of guard duty, he was genuinely grateful for the emotional training that had taught him to remain calm under pressure. "Well, Danny Johnson, my name is Thomas, and I'm going to help you find your mummy. She's probably looking everywhere for you right now." A small crowd had gathered around them, tourists amazed to see a Queen's Guard not only speaking but actually helping a child. Cameras flashed and phones recorded, but Thomas ignored them all. His focus was entirely on the frightened little boy, who needed his help. Nothing else mattered at that moment. Danny's tears began to slow as he processed Thomas's words. "You will? Really?" he asked, with the hopeful voice that only children can manage even in their darkest moments. Thomas nodded firmly, and the boy's face showed the first hint of relief he had displayed since Thomas had first spotted him. "I absolutely will," Thomas promised. "But I need you to help me, all right? Can you tell me what your mummy looks like? And do you remember where you last saw her?" He kept his questions simple and direct, knowing that frightened children could easily become overwhelmed with too much information at once. Danny wiped his eyes and tried to think. "She has yellow hair like mine, but longer. And she was wearing a red coat, a really bright red coat. She said it would help me find her in the crowd." The irony wasn't lost on Thomas that the mother had worn red to be visible, while he, in his red uniform, was the one who had found her son instead. "That's very helpful, Danny. And where were you when you last saw her?" Thomas asked gently. He noticed that the boy was beginning to calm down now that he had someone's full attention and a plan for finding his mother. The child pointed toward the main tourist area near the palace gift shop, over there by the big stone lions. "She was taking pictures of them and told me to stand right next to her. But then a big group of people came and everyone was pushing and I got moved away, and when the people left, she wasn't there anymore." Thomas understood exactly what had happened. Tour groups often moved in large clusters, and in the chaos, it would be easy for a small child to get swept away from his parent. The mother was probably panicking just as much as Danny had been, searching desperately through the crowds. "All right, Danny, here's what we're going to do," Thomas said, standing up but keeping his hand extended toward the boy. "We're going to walk over to where you last saw your mummy, and I'm going to help. You look for her. Stay right next to me, and hold my hand so we don't get separated too." Danny reached up without hesitation and grabbed Thomas's gloved hand with both of his small ones. The trust the child immediately placed in him was both touching and sobering. Thomas realized that his decision to break protocol had created a responsibility that went far beyond his normal duties. As they began walking toward the area Danny had indicated, Thomas became acutely aware of the spectacle they were creating. A Queen's Guard walking hand in hand with a small child was not something tourists saw every day. Phones and cameras followed, their every step, and he could hear excited whispers in multiple languages around them. But Thomas found that he didn't care about the attention. For the first time since joining the Guard, he felt like he was doing something truly meaningful. All the hours of standing perfectly still, all the rigid discipline, had never given him the sense of purpose he felt in this moment while helping one frightened little boy. Danny stayed close to Thomas's side, his small hand gripping tightly. The boy's steps were much shorter, so Thomas had to slow his usual military pace significantly. As they walked, Danny began to chatter nervously, the way children do when they're trying to stay calm. "My mummy said the guards are very important and that they protect the Queen," Danny said, looking up at Thomas with wide eyes. "Are you protecting me now too?" Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Yes, Danny. Right now, protecting you is the most important job I have." The simple honesty of his answer surprised even himself. He had never thought of his role in such personal terms before. They reached the area near the stone lions where Donnie had last seen his mother. The crowds were thick here, with multiple tour groups clustered around various monuments and photo opportunities. Thomas scanned the sea of faces, looking for a woman with blonde hair and a bright red coat who was probably searching frantically for her son. "Do you see her anywhere, Danny?" Thomas asked, lifting the boy slightly so he could get a better view. Over the heads of the adults around them, Danny looked in all directions, his face scrunched up in concentration. After a moment, he shook his head sadly. "I don't see her. What if she left without me? What if she went home and forgot about me?" The fear in the child's voice broke Thomas's heart. "Oh, Danny, no. Your mummy would never leave without you. Parents don't forget their children, ever. She's probably looking for you right now, just as worried as you were. Sometimes these places are just so big that it takes a while to find each other." Thomas began to develop a more systematic approach. He positioned himself and Danny near a central location where they would be visible from multiple directions. His red uniform and distinctive height would make them easy to spot for anyone looking for them. "Here's what we're going to do, Thomas," explained Danny. "We're going to stay right here where lots of people can see us. If your mummy is looking for you, she'll be able to spot my red coat from far away, just like you were supposed to spot her red coat." As if summoned by his words, Thomas heard a woman's voice calling out desperately from somewhere in the crowd. "Danny. Danny Johnson, where are you?" The voice was getting closer, filled with panic and desperation that only a parent could understand. Danny's head snapped up immediately. "That's her. That's my mummy," he shouted, his face lighting up with joy and relief. He began jumping up and down, waving his arms frantically. "Mummy, Mummy, I'm here." Thomas turned in the direction of the voice and spotted a blonde woman in a bright red coat pushing through the crowd. Her face was streaked with tears, and she was calling Danny's name while scanning desperately in all directions. She hadn't seen them yet, but she was moving in their direction. "There she is, Danny," Thomas said, pointing toward the approaching figure. "Wave your arms high so she can see you." The boy waved both arms above his head, calling out "Mummy" at the top of his voice. Several people in the crowd, having witnessed the reunion unfolding, began pointing and helping direct the mother's attention toward her son. When Danny's mother finally spotted him, her face transformed from anguish to pure relief and joy. She broke into a run, pushing past tourists and dodging around barriers, with the determination that only a parent finding their lost child could muster. "Danny," she cried out, dropping to her knees as she reached them.
Yes.
Danny let go of Thomas's hand and ran into his mother's arms, both of them crying now, but with happiness instead of fear. Thomas watched the reunion with a mixture of satisfaction and emotion that caught him off guard. The mother held her son tightly, rocking him back and forth while whispering words of comfort and relief. It was one of the most beautiful sights he had ever witnessed. After a few moments, Danny's mother looked up at Thomas, her eyes filled with gratitude and amazement. She seemed to suddenly realize that it was a Queen's Guard who had helped her son. Her expression showed both surprise and overwhelming thankfulness. "You found him," she said, her voice still shaky with emotion. "Oh, you actually left your post to help my little boy." Thomas knelt down again, to be at eye level with both Danny and his mother. "Any parent would have done the same thing, ma'am. Danny is a very brave boy, and he helped me help him by remembering exactly where he had last seen you." Danny's mother, whose name was Sarah Johnson, looked at Thomas with tears still flowing down her cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you. I've been searching for 20 minutes, getting more panicked by the second. When I turned around and he was gone," she couldn't finish the sentence, but Thomas understood the terror she had experienced. 20 minutes can feel like hours when your child is missing," Thomas said gently. "The important thing is that you're together now, and Danny handled the situation very well. He stayed in one area and was able to tell me exactly what you looked like and where to find you." Danny, still clinging to his mother but feeling proud of the praise, looked up at Thomas with admiration. "Thomas said he was protecting me, Mummy, just like he protects the Queen." Sarah Johnson looked at the guard with even deeper appreciation. "You risked getting in trouble, didn't you? I know the guards aren't supposed to leave their posts or talk to people. You could face consequences." For this, Thomas had been trying not to think about the potential repercussions of his actions, but her words brought the reality back into sharp focus. He glanced around and noticed that several of his fellow guards had witnessed the incident. Concerned, others appeared supportive, but all of them knew that breaking protocol was a serious matter. "Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than following rules," Thomas replied simply. "Danny needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. I couldn't live with myself if I had just stood there and done nothing." The crowd around them had grown larger, with many people taking photos and videos of the heartwarming reunion. Thomas realized that the story would likely spread beyond just the tourists present. In the age of social media, incidents like this could become viral news within hours. A fellow guardsman approached them, and Thomas felt his stomach tighten. It was Sergeant Williams, one of his supervisors, and his expression was unreadable. Thomas stood at attention instinctively, preparing for whatever consequences were about to come. "Guardsman Mitchell," Sergeant Williams said formally, causing both Sarah and Danny to look up nervously. "You left your post without permission?" "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, maintaining his military bearing despite the personal nature of the situation. "I take full responsibility for my actions." But instead of the harsh reprimand Thomas expected, Sergeant Williams's expression softened as he looked down at Danny, who was still holding tightly to his mother's hand. "And why did you leave your post, Guardsman Mitchell?" "The child was lost and in distress, sir. No one else seemed to notice or was available to help. I felt it was my duty as a human being to assist him in finding his mother." Sergeant Williams nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. He knelt down and addressed Danny directly. "Did this guard help you find your mummy, young man?" Danny nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir. He was very nice to me, and he held my hand so I wouldn't get lost again. He told me his name was Thomas, and that he was going to protect me." The sergeant looked at Sarah Johnson. "Ma'am, were you satisfied with Guardsman Mitchell's assistance?" "Satisfied doesn't begin to cover it," Sarah replied, her voice still emotional. "He went above and beyond what anyone could have expected. He showed incredible kindness and courage. I will never forget what he did for my son and for me." Sergeant Williams stood up and turned back to Thomas. For a moment, the guard thought he might still face disciplinary action. But then his supervisor did something that surprised everyone present. "Guardsman Mitchell," he said in a voice loud, enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, "you have demonstrated the finest qualities of service and compassion. While leaving your post is typically against protocol, protecting a child in distress represents the highest ideals of what it means to serve others." The crowd around them began to applaud, and Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been prepared to face consequences for his actions, but it appeared that his superiors understood the exceptional circumstances that had prompted his decision. Danny tugged on his mother's coat and whispered something in her ear. Sarah smiled and nodded, then addressed Thomas. "Danny has something he wants to ask you." The little boy stepped forward with the confidence that comes from knowing he's surrounded by people who care about him. "Thomas, can I have a hug? To say thank you for helping me?" Thomas looked at Sergeant Williams, who nodded with approval. Then he knelt down once more and opened his arms. Danny ran into them without hesitation, giving the guard the kind of enthusiastic hug that only children can give. As Thomas hugged Danny, he felt a profound sense of completion that he had never experienced during his years of silent duty. This simple act of human connection meant more to him than any commendation or formal recognition ever could. The boys. Small arms wrapped around his neck with pure trust and gratitude. "Thank you for finding my mummy," Danny whispered in his ear. "You're the best guard in the whole world." Thomas's eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. "Thank you for being such a brave boy, Danny. I'm honored that I could help you." The crowd around them continued to applaud, and many people were openly emotional at witnessing such a genuine moment of human kindness. Cameras continued to flash, but the attention no longer felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like the recognition of something truly special. Sarah Johnson approached Thomas as he stood up from the hug. "Is there any way we can stay in touch? I'd love to send you photos of Danny as he grows up, to show him the man who helped him when he needed it most." Thomas smiled warmly. "I would be honored, ma'am. Danny will always hold a special place in my heart." Sergeant Williams stepped forward with an official-looking piece of paper. "Guardsman Mitchell, this is a commendation for exceptional service above and beyond the call of duty. Your actions today will be noted in your permanent record as an example of the finest qualities of the Queen's Guard." The announcement brought another round of applause from the gathered tourists. Thomas accepted the commendation with genuine humility, but his eyes kept returning to Danny, who was beaming with pride at his new friend's recognition. As the formal ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Danny ran back to Thomas one more time. "Will you still be here tomorrow? Can I come see you again?" "I'll be here tomorrow, Danny, and anytime you visit the palace you can look for me. I'll always be happy to see you." Sarah took her son's hand, preparing to leave. "Come on, love. We should let Thomas get back to his important work." But she paused and looked at the guard one more time. "What you did today changed both of our lives. Danny was so scared, and you made him feel safe again. That's something I can never repay. Seeing him reunited with you is all the payment I could ever want." Thomas replied sincerely. As mother and son walked away, Danny turned back several times to wave at Thomas, who waved back each time with a smile. The other tourists who had witnessed the event began to approach Thomas, offering their own thanks, praise for his actions. Word of the incident spread quickly through social media and news outlets. Within hours, videos and photos of the Queen's Guard helping the lost boy were being shared around the world. The story resonated with people everywhere, showing that compassion and human decency could transcend any protocol or rule. Thomas returned to his post with a changed perspective on his role. While he resumed his traditional stance in silence, he now understood that being a guard meant more than just following procedures. It meant being ready to serve and protect in whatever way the situation demanded. Over the following weeks, Thomas received letters and emails from people around the world who had been touched by his story. Parents thanked him for showing that there were still people willing to help children in need. Fellow service members praised him for demonstrating the true meaning of duty and honor. But the most meaningful response came from Danny himself. The form of a hand-drawn picture showing a tall figure in a red coat holding hands with a small boy. At the bottom, in carefully written letters, it said, "Thank you, Thomas. You are my hero." 3 months later, Danny and his mother returned to Buckingham Palace. They found Thomas at his post, and while he couldn't break protocol again for a casual visit, he gave Danny a subtle wink that made the boy giggle with delight. Sarah later commented that her son had grown more confident and trusting since their encounter with the kind guard who had helped him. Thomas continued his service with the Queen's Guard, but his approach had been forever changed by one moment of choosing compassion over protocol. He had learned that true strength sometimes means being willing to break the rules when someone needs help, and that the most important duty any person can have is to care for others in their time of need. The story of Guardsman Thomas Mitchell and little Danny Johnson became a reminder that heroes aren't just found in grand gestures or dramatic rescues. Sometimes heroism is as simple as a soldier kneeling down to help a frightened child, proving that kindness and human connection are more powerful than any rule or regulation ever could be.